David will be giving 2 back-to-back lectures, which will end the lecture part of this conference today. The first of which is the message of Roswell, the message of the Roswell event, warning, teaching, or salvation. Please welcome David.
Microphone. Okay. Thanks very much for that introduction. Thanks for being here. I have to really hand it to Joe and his team and everybody who's worked to make us look all so good up here. This is the best venue I've ever been in, and the biggest screen I've ever got to talk with. It's going to be awesome. Well, I'm going to try to attend to the question of, was the Roswell incident a message? And the title is actually Message, Salutation, or Warning. And what I found is that all three things are simultaneously involved, with warning, I think, being the most accentuated. Unfortunately, I have to talk about numbers to begin with, but what you see on the screen is universal constants. It's what SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, Intelligence, has been trying to glean from the messages that come from the background static of space. If they could find some patterns that actually have mathematical clarity that are universal, that you don't need to have a certain proportion or number system or a language to understand or alphabet to understand, that these things will actually happen throughout the universe. No matter what species you are, you can still perceive these values. Universal constants, pi, which is the most basic, phi, which is a symbol basically that talks about one number added to the second number is 3, 3 plus the number before that, 2, you have 5, 5 plus 3, and it continues in this pattern that actually forms almost a fractal sort of spiral. You can see this in the golden section, you can see this in art, you can see this in nature. And in 1947, which has been most popularized by Richard Hoagland and his work on the monuments of Mars, the Cydonia. I have a horrible habit of looking down where my computer used to be and would be. Today it isn't, so I'll just stare this direction. 19.47 is, if you have a sphere and you put the first platonic solid inside of it, which is a tetrahedron, only 4 sides, a spinning sphere so that you actually have an axis that you can align one of those points to. The other 3 points will hit at these places here, 19.47 degrees. That is if, the equator is 0. Now, with the message of Roswell, 33 anchors all these universal numbers. And I'm going to have to move with a little more alacrity here. 33 is a number in the highest illuminated circles of the greatest change, the ultimate sign or number of transition. As we know, water cannot remain frozen at 33. That's the number that's been marked out. Pressure in the ocean increases by twice at 33 feet. We have 33 vertebrae in our spine, and incredible significance has happened on our Earth at 33 and a third in latitude. And all these universal constants being united by 33 show something significant in a time cycle. They're temporal. They're pointing out some point in our future. This is what it showed to me over and over again through the etymology, the history, the ancient works, the sages, the Jewish sages, Babylonian texts, Egyptian texts. They have all touched on 33 in some way, and pi, and 19.47. Now, of course, pi, this is kind of a glib explanation of what pi is. No matter what size circle you have, if you take, you can barely perceive that. If you take a circle and you measure its diameter, if you multiply it times pi, you will get the circumference. White is not a good idea for this laser. And this number, 3.14159, it's transcendental. It's irrational and transcendental, which means it goes on forever and it doesn't have a pattern that we certainly now have actually perceived. There's actually been supercomputers that have been built to find pi to billion decimal places, and they still haven't found a logical pattern to it. But this is a universal constant. Now, taking 33 times pi is the most basic expression of this message that's left in Roswell. What happens is you find the number 104 rounded off. What it is, necessarily to somebody who's into geography or even history, is that this represents coordinates in latitude and longitude. Now, you can't have a latitude, which is pole to pole, that's over 90 degrees. So it's easy to see that this would be your longitude, east-west, and this would be latitude. Only problem is, you have to decide where on the globe it is, north or south, southern hemisphere, east or west of the prime meridian. And I've done that on this map. You see that in the southern hemisphere, those coordinates only fall in the ocean and no islands. And then, of course, on the Himalayan plateau here, or here in America. And that's Roswell. And you also notice that the date, Roswell, New Mexico, the actual incident that happened here in Roswell, New Mexico, 1947, well, 19.47 is a fractal of that year. So you have the components of at least two of the four universal constants that I showed, plus if you count 33, it's also the same message. Now, we know that there was at least one craft that crashed here in 1947. What's amazing to me is I've lived most of my life in Helena, Montana. My father was a physician, and he actually knew Jesse Marcel Jr. before the book The Day After Roswell came out, or I think it was Stanton Friedman's book that came out, The Roswell Event. And so my father would come home and talk to me about, I know a doctor, and he talks to me about one time his father brought some debris from a downed disc, and when he was 11 years old, and he says that it was an extraterrestrial craft, and he'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to him about it. And he's an incredibly articulate and a brilliant person. And I thought, my dad's kind of nutty, you know? Why would he have anything to do with this? Because he's completely rationalist, complete concrete physician himself. But now we're seeing in the actual impact site of Roswell itself something that's absolutely mathematical and verifiable, because these fit universal constants that connect us not only to antiquity, history, and symbology in history, but also to Mars. So you can kind of look at the relationship of pi and 33 at the coordinates of Roswell as a loop, because if you take the latitude times pi, you get the longitude, and in reverse. Now, this fits into one of the greatest cycles of time that men know of, and that's the precession of the equinox. What happens with the precession of the equinox is every 72 years we move along the ecliptic, where the 12 signs of the zodiac are, 1 degree, 72 years, 1 degree. In total, 25,920 years. What happens is, if you sight the sun in the backdrop of the stars on the ecliptic during the four cardinal points of the year, spring equinox, fall equinox, and the solstices, the summer and the winter solstices, you will see that movement. Of course, most people don't live much over 72 years, so if 1 degree in change happens, it isn't something that they would understand unless someone had actually kept a record for many thousands of years. There are certain points on this zodiac of the 12 that are most significant in antiquity. These 4 points have the brightest stars in the sequence, And they also show up in animal forms over and over again that are associated with the deity. They're associated with the creator God of the universe. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, you see them most often in the symbols of the four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You also see them before that in the Old Testament as the sphinx-like cherubim that are in attendance around the most holy place of the temple itself, and even on the top of the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant. These two cherubim have, the face of a man, wings of an eagle, four parts of a lion, and then the back part here, the lion's tail is not exactly in the attitude of a true lion. It's supposed to be an ox. So what happens is, this is the 4 points of the zodiac where this actual alignment occurs. So you'll have either the solstices on this line and the equinoxes on this line. You wait 6,480 years, then you have it move again, 90 degrees. So the whole cycle always moves 90 degrees. This is a very significant time because the Greeks called it the aeon. In fact, in the New Testament Greek, when you see the word the end of time, sometimes it's actually the end of the aeon instead. And the aeon was understood by some of the more ancient Greeks as being a specific beginning and ending cycle of a cycle, where one is destroyed and then the other is born out of it. What's interesting, if you look at the Roswell message, is that these numbers of the aeon, and in addition, the actual distance around the Earth in nautical miles, this is a pretty simple calculation, 60. In the sexagestal system, which is actually the root of our time system, it's Babylonian and also Egyptian, 60 times 360 gives you 21,600, which is, in fact, nautical miles of our Earth, the median circumference of our Earth. If our Earth was a perfect sphere, it would be exact 21,600 nautical miles. What happens is, the number 33, as the root of this whole system, plugs these numbers into a almost arithmetic loop that goes on forever. And this can be seen in taking the actual distance of the Earth divided by 33, gives you a fractal of this aeon number. And on Roswell, the actual place itself, you can see where if you take the longitude divided by the latitude, you'll get this pi line, the resultant of that equation, which is actually moving from the lower 33s into the higher 33s, and the perfect 33 at the point where the most accurate descriptions of where the crash occurred is here at about 33 and a third and 104.7 decimal. If you take the distance of the circumference of the Earth divided by 33.33, you get a fractal of the aeon of the Greeks. Divide that by 19.47. You actually get this number, which is a place that Joe Jordan and Dave Ruffino and I actually went to a couple of years ago, along with my friend who took his metal detector to see if there's anything left of the actual crash. You take this number as a latitude times pi, you get the longitude of the Roswell event. So at Roswell itself, you have the precessional season, the quaternary precessional season. You have 19.47. You have the latitude, which incorporates the number 33, which links all this together, pi. And you also have an equation that's also part of it. If you can take this fractal and add 1947 to it, you get 2012. But that seems a little bit oblique, so I'll show you some more. And this is where it's pointing out a time. This is actually the sequence that it's coming to. This is not just pointing out the entity that actually crash landed, did it on purpose, and that they're intelligent, but that they had a reason for it. And the main reason is a warning. Something is going to happen, and it's going to be at 2012/2013 mark. And the reason I say that is because When you add the minutes in 33 hours and 33 minutes, you get 2013. But really, when you have 59 minutes on your digital clock, you don't have 60 minutes on your digital clock. As soon as it hits 60, it turns to the next hour. That's how these things are actually done. And the Mayan calendar itself ends at December 21st, which is the winter solstice, at the end of the year 2012. So you're nearly at the end of all of 2012 before their calendar ends. And that's exactly how this works. It's actually 2012.99999. If the Earth was a perfect sphere, I don't know what happened to the harmonics. I shouldn't move so much. Gesticulations seem to perturb the screen. Now, if the Earth was actually a perfect sphere, there would be 2,012 nautical miles to where Roswell is and the latitude that we're at right now. This demonstrates that there can be a complete string or loop of these numbers. They can plug into each other and work in this pattern that explains our orientation in space, our orientation in time, and our orientation on the Earth. And this is what I've tried to actually show here in reverse mode, but you could think of it as a circle. And that's another huge point of the Roswell event. Imagine circles, or the cycle of time itself. There's also the connection that Richard Hoagland had brought to our awareness of the Earth and Mars. There is a definite historical and symbolic link between the deities that founded the earliest civilizations and Mars itself. This is listed as the founding spirits or the founding gods of cities in the Sumerian texts and Egyptian texts and even late Greek texts, but also in the symbology and the numerology of those kingdoms. What's interesting about the link that Richard Hoagland has talked about is that it definitely points out that 1947 is redundant in the geometry of what was found on Mars by the Viking probes in the 70s, and also pi. He says this is a universal constant, which it is, because these geometric shapes are they're universal. You can't really come up with a shape, a three-dimensional shape that has less than three sides. And what's interesting about it is because this is the smallest or the most simple of Plato's the Platonic solids. A sphere is the most advanced. So having them superimposed actually makes a statement of the highest and the lowest actually merging in some way, or the mortal and the immortal, or the spiritual and the terrestrial. Here's a close-up of the actual configuration of where 19.47 actually originates in a sphere. And 33 and 19.47 are represented here in a place called Cydonia on Mars. Here, the major complex is at an angle, an azimuth, that's 19.47 of an arc in minutes from where the face and the D&M pyramid, called it D&M by DiPietro and Molinar, who actually discovered this from the NASA photographs. The distance between this giant pyramid, it's almost 2.5 miles wide and about 1,500 feet high, is exactly 1/360th the polar diameter of Mars itself to this face, one of the most famous constructs on Cydonia on Mars. And this city here has incredible significance when it comes to what I'll get into later. These are also the artifacts that have been discovered on Mars. This is, again, the D&M pyramid in high relief, and the face. And you really think these things have occurred by nature. They're very close together, within 5 miles of each other. However, the geology, which we call this erosion in bisymmetrical sort of fashion, where you have the suggestion of a human face here and the suggestion of a lion face here, contrasted with these sharp angles, doesn't exist in nature. You can't have them happening simultaneously. So the connection is well established between these two places through the Roswell event, which I will show. The next image is about phi. In Greek, the actual letter that's assigned to this function, which you can see here, the number 1 and 2 doubled, 1 and 1 doubled, it's 2, 2 and 1, 3, 3 and 2, 5, and so on, which gives you this proportion. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, which is just the doubling of these. The golden mean, which is the same function of pi, can actually be graphed out like a number that finally finds the actual mean, the actual middle resting point for itself, which is highly debated by mathematicians why this actually is, but it is. It's a universal constant. This function is also, according to Hoagland, found within the proportion of the external geometry of Cydonia itself. And it can also be plugged into the Roswell equation. The distance around the Earth, divided by 33, gives you the fractal of the aeon of the ages, and 1947 gives you the latitude, and it's divided by that. And then, of course, the golden mean actually puts together, everything leads back to 33 again. This is the latitude plus the golden mean, times 3 gives you the longitude of Roswell, divided by pi again, gives you a perfect 33 1/3. So I took the latitude and longitude of Roswell itself, and I found this strange equation, which goes on infinitely. And I asked a couple mathematicians who worked for the Department of Energy if they'd ever seen anything like that, and they first said, well, you know, it's because you're working with the number 3. And so I said, well, I challenge you to come up with an equation that will continue to just have decimal places move out 1 every single time, forever. And they weren't able to do it. They couldn't explain it to me. They said they would get back to me. What the point is, there's something about these coordinates that's universal. I'm having trouble. There we go. So all these numbers have been inserted into the Roswell event, the timing of the Roswell event, and the data points of its latitude and longitude. Now we get into some really interesting things, because this information, these numbers, don't just show up in Roswell. They show up in every major capital of this world, and they show up especially in Washington, D.C. You can see the latitude of Washington, D.C. is actually 19.47 twice, the 38.94 in decimal, 38 degrees, 54 minutes, 24 seconds. That's the line. It's twice 19.47. And the Pentagon is actually aligned at 33 degrees off of true north. Now, the similarities between what's on Cydonia and what's the actual Pentagon that's on Earth houses all the war-making powers of the greatest nation, at least the greatest war-making country on this planet at the present time. And Mars, the god of war in antiquity, has on it the largest structure, which is a pentagon itself. It just so happens that Cydonia was the name of a place where, in antiquity, there was an alien invasion. This is actually recorded in all the greatest works of antiquity in history and also in epic. You can actually find in Nonus Dionysia's work about what he thought this area of the world had to offer when it came to intelligence or knowledge of the rest of the world. He said it was the oldest place on the earth. It was actually the origin of civilization. From the beginning of time, people lived there, people of divine progeny. Their age is that of the universe. And that area of the world lies perfectly along the 33rd parallel. Sidon was actually the major city of Sidonia, and if you look at the Old Testament, Sidonia is called Canaan, but by the actual Sidonians themselves, they call themselves Sidonians. They were called by the Greeks Phoenicians. Sidon was the major city for the greatest antiquity, and Tyre, which is actually pronounced Tzor in the Phoenician, was switching over time capital status. But you'll notice Sidon's a perfect 33 1/3, and Tyre is 33 minutes cut perfectly in half. And you'll see this line runs through a place in Israel at present day called Galilee. And Gal is the root for Galilee, and it's spelled by two Hebrew letters, Gimel and Lamed, which actually equal themselves 33. On Sidonia on planet Mars, you actually have an angle, the azimuth of true north of the face and the city, off 33 degrees from the east. Now, Mount Hermon in Sidonia, or now actually modern Lebanon, it's on the border of Syria and Lebanon, is a very special place to the historians and the sages of antiquity. It's because at this place is where the first interaction between human beings and extraterrestrials occurred. And you can call it that, seriously, because that's how the ancients explained it. They came from heaven, and the descriptive terms of them are manifold, but they called them angelic. An angel in the Hebrew, Malach, just means messenger. Angelos in Greek means messenger. They brought information with them. They taught the art of civilization, and this is where they came. In Hermon, in Sidonia, on the 33rd parallel. And it's not just listed in the Western canon in the Bible. You can find it in all these extra-canonical books, and also, of course, in Genesis. Now, the name that's actually mentioned in the book of Enoch, which is the ultimate source for all this information of who came down to Mount Hermon and what they did, Enoch calls these beings the Watchers. It's translated from the Hebrew, which is pronounced Er, and this is the actual Hebrew rendering of that word. If you look in any of the Hebrew concordances or lexicons, you'll find that not only is this form used for the word for watcher that Enoch used, you can find the same word in the Bible, translated watcher, and in the exact same form for city. And this is a cuneiform for the same, and it's pronounced Eri also. And so there's a strange connection between the idea of civilization itself, the founding of civilization, the building of cities, and Mars, and even the root form for the Greek word for Mars. You will see the great lengths that these ancients went to try to embed this number and the universal numbers that are embedded in the Roswell event in the outlay of their cities. The two sister cities, the two cities that traded capital status in Sidonia and antiquity, these two places are exactly 19.47 nautical miles from each other. And if you circumscribe circles, two of them at these two latitudes, and draw the line, the azimuth connects these circles at 33 degrees. At Lebanon, at ancient Sidonia, the largest structures ever erected on the planet are located. This is Baalbek in northern Lebanon. You can see these two gentlemen standing over what is called the Baalbek Trilithon, which is a huge platform and foundation for here Phoenician building, Greek, and later Roman building. The Romans built the biggest temples that they had ever built anywhere on the earth here, along with all this other structure. These blocks weigh in excess of almost 800 tons. It's about 14 feet high by about 70 feet long each. Here's a two figures from the Pioneer 10 plaque that Richard Hoagland helped design. And when I was doing the lecture in Kokopelli, I made sure I put these guys up for scale so you can see how huge the trilithon is. Here's one giant stone that's still left in the quarry, and some men standing in front of it so you can see the size of this thing. It's just immense. It's stupefyingly huge. But you'll notice an interesting thing is this wear mark here. These are poking above, they used to poke above detritus that was laid down during the Pleistocene era. The Pleistocene era laid down all this gravel through water during glaciation over 12,000 years ago. Now, what's interesting about the area of Cydonia and architecture and the megalithic sites that I just showed you is that they have a commonality between the building that happened in Israel. Solomon himself actually recruited Tyrian metalworkers and masons to build the temple. In the book, The Testament of Solomon, he used this symbol to yoke demons to help him build this edifice. It's a complete occult account of the building of the temple, but it's interesting nonetheless because it fits into the paradigm of the spiritual and what is actually being suggested in Roswell. The temple itself, according to this legend, is that the stones themselves were moved and floated into place, and that they were cut without using conventional tools. A shamir, which was something that was more alive than anything else, was set up against the face of the rock, and they would have along their crystalline structure, and through vibrations of sound, these things were moved into place. Sounds exactly like the building myths of many other ancient cultures. This is a Masonic image of a trestle board and the Temple of Jerusalem. Interesting, you see the two pillars in front of the doors of the temple. What the focus is and what the suggestion is that there is something very, very significant geometrically about the Temple of Jerusalem and the intelligence that built it. And the president at the time of the Roswell event was Harry Solomon Truman, which most people don't know his middle name, and he happened to be the 33rd president. The Temple of Jerusalem is one of the most important points to this whole picture, understanding the message of the Roswell event. All you have to do is look at what the temple represents in antiquity. From Jerusalem, there's exactly 33.33 miles to the coast of the Mediterranean, and at azimuth of 19.47 degrees from east. In fact, you can actually explain the crop circle phenomena using this paradigm. In distance from Jerusalem at these points. At 33 degrees, of course, you're at 2012, 2013 miles. And you'll notice the circle that extends away from Jerusalem at that angle hits at a place where our prime meridian runs through. And also a line that I'll explain too, which is incredibly significant and was really extraordinarily significant to the Gauls and the Druids and those that built most of the monuments, the megalithic monuments in that island. But pay specific note to also this number, there it is, here, 2009 miles, because this is the number that worked in that equation, the equation loop of Cydonia, of the Roswell event. Here, 33 degrees exactly results in 1980. 1980 is really, if you want to understand it, nautical miles is just 33 times 60. And amazingly, 32.28 gives you 19.48 nautical miles, which just so happens to be the distance from the Temple Mount to London itself. And London was the last country that actually ruled over Israel before it became a sovereign nation. Now, these are crop circles that I think are made to order. This one from the Barbary Castle area just showed up recently, and it maps out pi. what it does is it has 36-degree swaths in each one of these points. And so what you have is 3 of them. 3, a point, 1, 4, 1, 5, 9, 2, and so on. So it goes to these many decimal points. Why are these occurring here? As you notice, from the distance of Jerusalem, you have 33 and a third, and 33, 1980 nautical miles, 2013 nautical miles, encompasses this swath. And in fact, from 1980 forward, the crop circle phenomena was born. When Solomon bought the temple site, the actual place where the Holy of Holies was, he bought it from a Jebusite. And Jebu actually means, in Hebrew, a threshing floor or a threshing circle. And what this thing is used for is to thresh grain. What they do is they put grain here, and then they have an ox tread over it in a circle and press it down and break the grain from the stalks. So the temple site is actually literally a crop circle. And the crop circles employ the numbers, the universal numbers that are in Roswell. Of course, here these points are actually hitting in 19.47 degrees at this angle. Of course, the circle itself, the number of the 360-degree system, and here you're actually seeing fractals that suggest phi. And in Hebrew, a ring or a circle, as I was saying, is actually 33 itself. This equals the word gal, which not only means a circle, but means to reveal. And these are derivatives of that word gal. And every one of them has something to do with not only cycles around things, but they also fit into where Christ was crucified when he was 33 years old. After he finished his ministry at Galilee, where there's actually recorded 33 parables, 33 great miracles. The first things that he said after his resurrection was, tell the disciples that I'll meet them in Galilee. And the 33rd parallel crosses neatly over this area that's geologically even formed as a circle. He was born literally on pi, the function of a circle, at pi times 10, 31.4159, and the limit of his ministry went exactly to, and it actually records it, where Tyre is here, and then Mount Hermon, which resides pretty close to 33 and a third north latitude. So going back to the crop circle event, this latitude hits another function of the circle, which is 360. 360 divided by 7. We have 7 days in our week. And what's significant about this is the number 7 seems to be the number of completion in all the antiquity, in the Bible especially. 360 divided by 7 gives you this latitude, which runs right through a place in Wiltshire called the Avebury Circle, which is the ultimate expression of a Galilee, a circle, a ring in Hebrew. Now, here's an image of how significant that number is, 360 divided by 7, giving you this number. All the other cardinal numbers divide into 360 evenly except 7, and that's exactly where the latitude of the Avebury Circle is. Now, if you take 7 times 360, you get this number, which is also part of the revelation to John, the idea of how long this end point, where the Messiah, though he has a first coming, he has a second coming, and the whole process will take 7 years, but the number of years that's actually mentioned by him and Daniel, the prophet, is 2,520. What's interesting about 2,520 times pi gives you the median diameter of the Earth. And you can actually check this on the NASA site. They'll tell you, yes, the Earth is exactly 7,916.81 miles, statute miles across. And then times pi again gives you the median circumference of the Earth. And Avebury Circle is actually 19.47 degrees from the Temple Mount, and not just the Temple Mount. This little place here where the Holy of Holies used to be, because the ancient works of the Talmud and some of the tractates that have to deal with the location of the temple's Holy of Holies say that it was in a direct line east to west from where the East Gate was, which lies in this place. This latitude is exactly 19.47 from Avebury. And as you can see, as you look closer, that enigmatic line of 360 divided by 7, right here, and the prime meridian are all within 33 degrees from Jerusalem itself. So the function actually points back to Jerusalem. This number 33 points back to Jerusalem. Looking at Avebury again, you actually will see some of these numbers that point out some of the apocalyptic numbers of Revelation. And 7 times 660 feet actually do give you the distance from Avebury Circle to Silbury Hill. And here's the actual distance of Avebury Circle itself from the Jerusalem Temple Mount at 2,009 nautical miles. This number here as the azimuth of the direction to Jerusalem, 21 degrees, 0.60, is actually part of how long it would take for the sun to move through the zodiac one sign. So 1/12 of the zodiac takes 2,160 years. Come on. This shows you again that it all works into a loop, a cyclic loop, which time is actually pointing out 2009. Back to Cydonia again. Even the area itself has a superimposition of the Mars Cydonia area. Here's a tetrahedral pyramid on the edge of this crater. There's actually a wall that's on the ejecta blanket around the crater, and from this anomalous place called the Tholis by Richard Hoagland, there's an angle of 19.47 degrees. This is a guy named David Percy's work. He found exactly the same configuration between Silbury Hill, Avebury, and even the small community here where there's a church built on Avebury itself. The name Jerusalem is circular. It actually equals 1,146, which is 365 times pi, the number of days in our solar year. There's another word in Hebrew that actually equals the same number, and that's Leviathan. Leviathan in Hebrew actually means a serpent that's joined. And the greatest joined serpent in the historical references and the symbolic grimoires that you can find to actually break down what this ultimately means is this. You'll notice it's a head and an eye of a serpent biting its tail. This happens to be the center of our galaxy. That's a close-up of it. Now what's interesting about that is the Milky Way actually cuts through our zodiac perfectly in half. So you have half the signs on one side and half on the other, and this place actually falls on one of the four cardinal points of the sky where you have, like I was saying, the zodiac cognate being, if you put it together, the man, lion, bull, and eagle. It falls right in the middle of them. Interestingly enough, Sagittarius is pointing out where that ecliptic line cuts across the center of our galaxy with his arrow. Ancient symbols of Sagittarius himself actually include this function of him pointing out the center of our galaxy, where Ouroboros meets his tail. This is a Jewish calendar, which is actually doing the same thing in a little different way, pointing out the center of where Leviathan's mouth is. Here's Sagittarius pointing it out, and of course here's the Temple Mount with the Muslim Dome of the Rock, which exists there now. On Mars, the Sidonian face and profile actually is a facsimile of the god Nergal of Sumeria. And Nergal was a god of Mars. And on this side you have a lion's face, and this side a kind of dead-looking human. Which is interesting because the configuration of where the center of this point is, where you have Sagittarius pointing it out, is the arrow goes through the mouth of this galaxy point and hits Antares in Scorpio, which actually means the other Mars. This all happens, this alignment happens December 21st, 2012. In the morning on December 21st, before the sun rises, the Milky Way this snake-like starry mass will have aligned so that it isn't like a river that goes across the sky. It will align so that it circumvents the horizon of the Earth. This is a Jewish card for the new year, and it's connected with the idea of changes of the new year because in the Jewish writings, their legend in the Talmud, it actually says that Leviathan will surround the earth like a tent at the end of days, which is exactly what this is about. The end of days are actually signaled by this alignment. Every 6,480 years, which is the coordinary points of our zodiac, where the sun will rise either in the equinoxes or the solstices, have marked huge changes. 4,468 BC is actually where, if you look at the chronology of the ancient texts, the idea that civilization itself was formed, and the idea of the Tower of Babel, the nations scattering across the earth and building independently from the Fertile Crescent. Then you go back even before that, you actually end at the end of the Pleistocene era, where the majority of flora and fauna in the northern hemisphere was completely destroyed by water. You can find the pattern all the way back every 6,480 years. This symbol is repeated in every culture as a beginning and the ending of a cycle. And the idea of the Chinese dragon being awoken on the New Year's of the Chinese calendar stems from this idea that if the dragon, which is the Ouroboros, in other words, the other idea of a Leviathan is Ouroboros, the tail eater, its ultimate expression as the galaxy of our solar system, in the Milky Way, when it aligns on the horizon again, the Earth will be destroyed because every time it had happened before there was a cataclysm. So on the new year, to keep this from happening, the celestial dragon is awoken and kept awoken by fireworks. The Apiary Circle supposedly had a configuration that was serpentine before it was destroyed. You can go back into antiquity and see the same symbol over and over again. And the reason for that is it's talking about the configuration of that endpoint. And this is a phoenix, and here is Leviathan or Ouroboros. In antiquity, the four cardinal points of the sky included not, here would be, in the modern zodiac would be Scorpio. In the ancient calendar, in the ancient zodiac, it was a phoenix or an eagle. And it's poised right on the head of the snake. This is the configuration that you would actually see, and this is what it would look like on the morning of 2012, December 21st. So you have the symbol of a phoenix, the symbol of rebirth, at the point where the sun cuts across Leviathan, and Young was actually able to say that the iconography of this idea of a serpent that eats his tail is the idea of something being reborn out of its own death, or a cycle ending and then a new one beginning. The grimoires of the illuminated elite use this symbol over and over again. And you'll see 33 associated with it in every case. You'll even see it in the Great Seal of the United States. And even this number, 1776, works into the arithmetic of a cycle, ending here again at a number pi times the number of days in our solar year. Here's the Aviary circle connected to the crop circle phenomena. And here you have, if you were to look at this in 3 dimensions, 2 tetrahedrons superimposed on each other, and also the Star of David. It's a symbol of Israel and Jerusalem, and it's greatly venerated because it contains the geometry and the mathematics of time. In fact, the first temple was built, and the average, I found the year 960 BC to be the one most mentioned. It's also interesting to note that in the Old Testament, time as a year is meted out in 360 days and not 365. So what happens if you take the actual year of the first temple being dedicated by King Solomon himself times pi, which seems to be the connecting tool mathematically for all these equations, you get 3015. I converted that number from prophetic years to solar years, and the solar years actually equal the year of the actual building of the first temple, and then 2012. And you'll notice an interesting point here. You can divide these times from the actual death and resurrection of Christ into 3 sections of 330 years each, and then from 33 AD to 2012, 3 sets of 660 years each. Back to topography, the latitude here of the temple site in ancient times, 31 degrees north, 46 minutes. You'll actually notice that the longitude and latitude, if added together, gives you 66.6. I kind of wondered what that had to do with, because, I mean, if this is where the Holy of Holies is, and Christ himself actually talking about the temple representing him architecturally, then why would 666 have to do with the longitude? Well, with the actual adding the longitude and latitude, well, the longitude itself was actually not established until 1886 by Allen Chester Arthur, the President of the United States. They had the World Meridian Conference, and they decided that Greenwich would be the prime meridian for the whole Earth. So there were evidently a lot of illuminated folks who joined that conference to make sure that this would work out. Or it just came by happenstance. But you'll notice that even 1776, the year of our independence, is 888 doubled. 888 is the name of Jesus in Greek. The actual letters equal 888. What's being suggested is that somehow our country was built to endure to the second advent of Christ. And this is interesting because 8 times 8, or 64, times the latitude of Jerusalem, and especially the Temple Mount, gives you 2013. The actual revival of the nation of Israel, 1948, plus 64 years, gives you 2012. Now the symbol of the great pentagram, where we find on Mars, has incredible antiquity. Let's go. And you often find it in the Jewish grimoires circumvented by the words Leviathan. And this is ancient Hebrew for Leviathan. The reason it's an important symbol is because the pentagon or pentagram actually marks out how long it takes to move through one cycle of precession, the longest time cycle that men know. 72 times 360 actually gives you the number of the precessional cycle, 25,920 years. This is a Cydonia fruit. The actual scientific name for it is Pyrus Cydonia, from Pyrus, the fiery Cydonia fruit. Amazingly, this is the only golden apple in antiquity. There were no apple cultivars that were gold. If there's ever a story or a myth from antiquity that talks about golden apples, this is it. It's also known as a quince, which is the word for 5. And that's why Plato would have one of his initiates cut an apple that he had in half. If the initiate would cut the half at the equator, it would reveal the star, the pentagram in the side of the apple. And this is exactly what the ancient knowledge is about. If we can understand the duration of the precession, we will know when the timing of the end will occur, the end of our present age, and actually the ending of the most important age there is. That is why you find megalithic sites set exactly at 72 degrees from each other when looking from the North Pole of the Earth in the Northern Hemisphere and also in the Southern Hemisphere. In the Quran itself, it actually talks about these ancient sites, these megalithic sites of actually having been made before Adam himself. That's an incredible statement, especially when it comes from the Quran. The jinn are supposedly beings of smoke. They were descended from the angels, which are beings of fire. But it said that these descendants of the angels built these megalithic sites in ruins that still stand in forgotten places, which is amazing. Here, this is actually where the Baalbek Quarry is, and you can see how worn this area is. It's Pleistocene, where marine alluvials are actually found here, which means they were deposited from ocean water 13,000 years ago. In the Edfu Temple texts in Egypt, there's actually a statement that says that the most ancient of Earth's temples and monuments were built to bring about the resurrection of the destroyed world of the gods. You can find this evidence in places that haven't even been discovered at this point, which is amazing to me because I didn't think there were any unexplored portions of this planet, but now that we can actually avail ourselves of things like Google Earth, for one thing, we can see things that others could never see from the perspective that we can because it's from space. And that's a big point because all the ancient references in antiquity that talk about civilization said that they came from space, they came from the heavens, and that they were handed, this knowledge was handed to men. And here is a site of one of the greatest archaeological sites in the world and the least explored. And part of the reason is because this whole area, this plateau in the Andes, is over 13,000 feet in altitude. But this line here is half 33 degrees. And it's right here at the center where there's an island of the sun, as it's called by the Inca. And one of the greatest megalithic sites called Tiwanaku. And here it shows you where half 33 is in the symbols of actual masonry. And a compass rose, which is also part of the etymology of Roswell itself. The idea that in navigation, all you needed was 33 points on the compass to find your direction on this planet. Here's 6 feet of Pleistocene alluvials laid over this mass that was just recently uncovered at Tiwanaku off of Lake Titicaca, south of the lake. It's at 13,000 feet, as I said, and this is all waterborne detritus. Here's a picture from an expedition in the late 1800s, a joint French and American expedition. You can actually see this huge megalith lying where it had been contoured by running water. A huge volume of running water. And this is the enigma that I actually found in the early part of this year, located all around Tiwanaku, all around Lake Titicaca. In fact, it saturates an area of almost 6,000 square miles. This is a 747. 747s are about 220 feet in length. And all this, these are contoured, built up ridges on a hill. And you can actually see that what we're looking at here is many, many thousands of feet of rock work for no real good explanation, because we're at almost 14,000 feet here. These are all running up the hill, so they're not designed to hold water for agriculture. Right here, you have the same enigmatic lines, but this time around it you have overburden. And it's interesting because this is all bedrock, and this overburden was deposited later. You can actually see the contours going under the overburden and then reappearing on the other side here, where this next hill starts. And these things had been eroded away by rain. Here again is the 747 by reference. This suggests that these were actually intact and put down before the Pleistocene era, around 13,000 years ago. This gives you some idea of the magnificent size of this area. All of these rock-built structures, contours, rectilinear structures that repeat over and over again, have no obvious function. They're not agrarian. They really shouldn't be there. If you go to this area, to the La Paz Museum in Bolivia, and you actually have to stay overnight and you're a foreigner, they'll give you supplemental oxygen so you don't get oxygen deprivation sickness overnight. That's how high up these things are. Yet you have the actual mass here that exceeds that which was put into Hadrian's Wall, which actually goes all the way across England. And here's some other variations of the same theme. These huge etchings are taken out of solid rock. This shows you the great extent, here's the plane again, of how varied and vast these things are. A close up. Here's the Andean Range. It goes up to around 17,000 feet. And this plateau here, an average of around 13,000 feet. As far as I could ascertain from the ancient records, when Pizarro went and actually conquered the Inca in 1525, his chroniclers realized that Tiwanaku itself had been built, as the priest said, by the emissaries of what they called the creator god Viracocha. And Viracocha has exactly the same contourings on his face and body as what you see in the geoglyphs. And that giants were supposed to have built Tiwanaku in one night, and that they called the stones into being and actually floated them into place. You hear the same story of the building of the Temple of Jerusalem, and that the giants that had been created first by Viracocha became evil and Viracocha destroyed them, but they were his children. These actual beings are looking forward to the return of their creator God, and they have commonality with the belief of the Aztecs of the return of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, or the Maya Kukulkan, the idea that their God that is in the heavens, that is the head of all their gods, which is serpentine in nature, whose identity not only is reptilian and dragon-like, which is identified in Revelation as satanic, but also time-oriented. He dualistically represents not only his moral alignment, but also when he will come back. Now, this is just an example, very quickly, because I think I'm going over, of something I think is relative to the spiritual manifestation in real time, and not just in antiquity. This is actual, this is an image from my brother's computer software program developing service. We'd had a conversation about Philip Corso's The Day After Roswell book, and how the debris was supposedly back-engineered and put into the private sector of the United States. And he contrived this whole picture here of an alien gray, holding an integrated circuit, which he said, to come up with this actual chemical properties of an integrated circuit through trial and error, he thinks are impossible. He put this on our website, which deals with the Cydonia monuments, all the information about biblical prophecy, the interpretation of all these end-time events as coming from a literal and an actual synergistic view of history, the actual belief that there were gods that came and that they're going to come again. This is on that website. And in 2002, this was imprinted in a field in the Wiltshire area in England. It's over 2 football fields in length. This is a picture of people standing in that circular portion right here to give you a size of how huge it is. You'll see the connections are quite obvious. And it talks about Roswell. There's actually 59 lines of resolution here, just like in a picture screen. And if you cross this circle, where it's suggested the margin of this image is, there's 33 lines. Now 59 times 33 actually gives you 19.47, or 1947. And what you're actually seeing here is the number of minutes in a clock face to get a total hour will be 60, but of course the next hour happens. So 59 is the number. You multiply 33 times and you'll get 19 minutes, 47 seconds. 19.47. This is another version of the same symbol with tetrahedrons, which are also part of the 19.47 motif. What is actually coming to, what this all brings us to, is we're looking at a repeat of the ancient times. We're looking at the ultimate expression of those beings which actually cultivated humanity in the beginning and brought them into awareness of how to become civilized. The civilization itself was actually brought from heaven in all the ancient records. And you notice we're getting ready, and we're actually politically getting ready and economically getting ready for that point in the future. We cannot avoid the inevitable invasion of these beings. They're coming back. And that's what I'll get into in the next lecture. Thank you very much.